All right, we're back here. Saint Life Podcast, episode 3.
Life.
Black is King, part 3. Brother Curt Kennedy, man, you've been with me the last 2 episodes. This is the 3rd episode in a row. How you doing, man?
Good, man. I'm doing good, fam. You know what I'm saying? It's been cool. I'm appreciating having fun doing this, man. We just no script. We just straight no chasing. That's how we do. That's how I'm from that. You know that. So I'm good with it.
Right. I wanted to feel like it's a real conversation. Like me and you, like I just called you up and just had a list of things that I wanted to ask you.
Right.
Yeah.
That's how we do it, right? That's how we do it anyway. So.
That's exactly. That's what
they
we
just
do
getting to
behind the
hear how
scenes.
we would normally get down for the most part.
Exactly. This is the first time they get to hear it, but this ain't the first time we doing this.
Yeah, so. Right. Nah.
Well, we might as well get right into it, man. Did you get to listen to Eric Mason's sermon called Overcoming the Stronghold of Racism?
Mm-hmm. So I didn't hear the whole sermon, but I am aware of what he said because I heard him talk about what he said. I heard others talk about what he said. And then I heard his apology, and then I heard his interview with Ruslan and all of that. So I didn't watch his sermon per se, but I'm aware that he jumped out there, and off the Sambo. He did the little, the minstrel show, little vibe a little bit with, blackface, calling the people, the brothers and sisters who deny systemic racism, kind of calling them sellouts for Uncle Tom's for real on one level. I mean, that's basically what happened.
Right. I think he started off with a Jane Elliott clip, the one where she's like, stand up if you, she's talking to the people in the audience and says, stand up. They're all white. Stand up if you would want to be treated like black citizens in America are treated, stand up or raise your hand. And none of them raised their hands, which proved that they knew the systemic racism, the hate that was happening was going on. And they just, her question was, well, why aren't you doing nothing about it? He started off with that clip and then went right in on the sermon. Mind you, this is on a Sunday to a mixed audience. He has white people that go to his church, and he's talking about systemic racism in Philly and in America in general, and just started exposing some things. And,
do you know what text he used?
Oh, man. We're going to be doing this in the basement, this episode, like breaking it down. I will say this is that he started off with the Jane Elliott clip, and then he started going into where he sees systemic racism. And then it was a good amount of time before he actually got into the text. So I would say that's probably my biggest
biggest beef with it.
Yes, he took a long time to get into the text, which, I mean, for a speech itself or a lecture or just talking to people, that it's nothing to me. I agree with maybe 75% of it. But for a sermon where I believe you're supposed to exposit the word of God.
Right.
It took a little while for him to get there.
Right.
Which shows you his agenda, I don't want to take nothing from him, but his agenda to other people could have been looked at as he wasn't there preaching the word of God. He just wanted to share what it was, that was on his heart. It didn't seem like he was, to them, it didn't seem like he was there to preach. It was more there to just talk. So
yeah, I mean, and that may be the case. I mean, so there's a lot of stuff with that, right? So just on general principle, Eric Mason is the primary preacher in that church. So he probably preaches 40 times a year. I know I pretty much do. I've been the lead pastor in my church for the last 7 years. And I had the lion's share of the preaching. If he, as the lion's share preacher in that church, decides one particular Sunday that he's going to do something slightly different, I don't see no problem with that. Now, I'm not saying I agree with what he said or did. I'm just saying on general principle, if he preaches the word every Sunday and pretty much decides on this particular Sunday, I'm gonna give you less book. I'm gonna address some things from my heart. I don't see a problem with that, man. I don't see that.
No, I get it. I mean, I think this is.
I don't think it's less shepherding. You know what I'm saying? Like shepherding isn't just.
Exactly.
They're like when you counsel someone and you sit down, you're not always got the Bible open. Sometimes you're just hearing them out. you giving perspective. You're not, there's multiple ways, to do that. So I don't look at that just in and of itself as a problem.
Right. I was going to mention that. I think today, especially in our corners where we're at, a lot of times people will think that to be a pastor just means to be a preacher. And that's not the case. That's not what the scriptures talk about.
Being a teacher, it means to be a teacher. That's different.
Yeah. I mean, there's parts to being a pastor, that people forget. It's shepherding, It's taking care of the flock. And so sometimes you may not, spend the whole sermon expositing word for word every part of the text, but talking to them.
Well, the thing about, and I mean, I'm not one of those people that thinks, oh, this is like white man's homiletics and Western, I'm not one of those people that think that way.
Right.
But I do think when you go to seminary, they teach you homiletics and hermeneutics, the text, but that's not good preaching. Good preaching is you got to exposit the people as well. I mean, there's a reason why Paul wrote each of the letters don't always contain the identical information, because Paul is writing, understanding the dynamics within that particular body of that church, and he's writing to them, addressing the things that are important.
Yeah.
And we get to see all of it together, but at that time, they didn't know. I mean, Paul couldn't. I don't get the impression that Paul knew the extent of his writing, and the apostles knew that they would be thousands of years. What they wrote would be the governing, eternal sort of material / eternal fundamental principle governing body would be their words. I don't know if they thought that would happen. I mean, I know that they said that their words were the scriptures, but I don't know if they knew that 2,000 years later, we're going to be using your words to measure ourselves by. So again, I just think that, you got to exegete the people, man. And sometimes your church needs to hear this. It's not necessarily that they don't need to hear this every Sunday, but they might need to hear this today. And I think that's the culture that we're in, the times that we're in, and some of the challenges. I think it's appropriate to be that way.
I get it, man. I get it. So this is, you did see it. I'm wondering where to go from here, because did you watch the apology?
I did.
Because he apologized after giving this sermon because, somebody.
Well, it was because somebody in his church got to him. Somebody in his church that was black got to him and was hurt by that. And I appreciated his response to that. That he was hurt, that he hurt someone else, and realized that, I crossed the line. And I think he did cross the line, to be honest. I think he did. I think him mocking black people for not agreeing with systemic racism is one. I think it's unbiblical to do that. Systemic racism is not a core doctrine of the scriptures. It's not something that people have to believe. And even then, even if it was a core doctrine, we don't really mock people for not doing that. We try to win them, right? That's 2 Timothy 2:25 and 26. Particularly if they're unbelievers, we try to win these folks. And so I think the decision to mock them, which he said, so I'm not going to sit here and berate. I mean, he apologized for it. He humbled himself. And what I appreciated that he did was he did not have to do that and put it out on Facebook, because Eric Mason knows that people are going to take that, what he did, and dice it up and chop it up and try to, crush him even more. Like he could have just called a meeting at his church and only apologized to them and just let woke clips in them take whatever he said and put that on their Twitter page. But he put it out there. He humbled himself. And I appreciated that. I've seen Thabiti do that a couple years ago as well. I never see the guys that are on the other side, the anti-woke side, do that stuff. I don't see that. Like I don't see Jeff Durbin or James White apologize for the things that they say.
Let's talk about that, because I did. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, I was going to say I just think it's fascinating to see that, where the accusations and where the humility actually is coming from.
Right. I do see more humility on that side, and the reason why I'm starting off with that is because I posted Eric's, Dr. Eric Mason's sermon in the basement Facebook group, just to see what people thought. And then, to be fair, to be balanced, I put in there Jeff Durbin's
yeah, I saw that
response to Eric Mason's, not to this sermon, but just to his theology, the way that he
It was
preaches.
at a conference he did last year. I remember that joint.
Yeah, Laugh, Love, Feast or something.
Yeah, we did.
Like that.
Strack was down there. Strack and Flora went down there.
Yeah, you guys did a whole episode.
We did an episode on it. Yeah. So
back in October. I went back and listened to your episode again. It was very good. You guys can go and check it out. But, you know, in his sermon, or it was called a sermon, if you go to Apologia, it's called a sermon. He addressed Eric Mason, or, you know, he addressed woke theology. He addressed anyone that is in that bubble, anybody and everybody. And towards the end, the very end of his sermon, he pretty much says, get that woke bull-ish out of here.
But he didn't say ish.
No, he did not say it. He literally said bull s. You know what I mean?
Right.
And
he cursed. I mean, he just cursed. Yeah. In
even
the pulpit,
I'm being respectful, knowing that there might be kids listening to this right now, so I'm not gonna say it. But he didn't have that type of, you know, decency,
the restraint,
the wisdom, the discernment not to use that word. He felt that in order to get his message across just as boldly as the prophets do, he had to cuss. You know, he's a modern day prophet, right? I mean, and I'm not trying to make light of this, but that's the way it seemed in the sermon.
Well, I'll make light of it because I think that's the way he came off, and he challenged himself and others to be prophets. Here's a couple problems with that. Number one, you don't live how the prophets live, fam. The prophets in the Old Testament had some serious struggles and drama and hearing from God like that directly. You're not the mouthpiece of God in that way. And you don't want the kind of smoke that the prophets got. Number one. Number two, you know, you in a video or in the sermon, he said, look, what he did was he set it up and gave a brief polemic of why he doesn't cuss. His kids I think he even mentioned like maybe even disciplining his kids if they did, like they just know we don't do that. So you made it clear that that's not something you do in front of your own children, but you didn't have the discernment to not do it in front of other people and their children.
Right.
Because I know people who were there that would looked at each other like, what? Like he said it in front of other people with their children there. And the fact that men applauded him after that and made it seem like that type of stuff right there, that's the type of stuff that why there's division in the church, because people like him can get away with that type of stuff. But if Eric Mason says there's systemic racism, then everybody flips out and they come after him. But this dude can cuss in the pulpit and be applauded by a room full of mostly white men. So again, some of the stuff that's happening right now are deeper issues of hypocrisy and a lack of trust. And people are making them out to be about racism or about being woke and all this stuff. And it's like, that's not even what the real issues are for real. So to me, you know, if you're going to do that, Jeff Durbin, do it, but just do it. Don't try to sell us on it and make it seem like this isn't what you normally do. But because I'm so like, here's the thing. What fruit of the spirit is that? Number one, right? Number two, where does the Bible give us license to say, hey, because I'm concerned about this thing that I think is happening, I'm gonna go ahead and sin in this way? Like, you just can't do that, fam. You can't. You know, it's funny in Fault Lines in Voddie's book. There's I can't remember what page it's on, but he says that people have said to him that guys from his position, they generalize other guys in ways that are not fair or whatever. And he said something. I'm paraphrasing, but he said, and I'm not going to deny and say that doesn't happen. However, we're more concerned about the woke, that stuff. And I just read that and I thought that's really interesting. So, you know, when you say like you generalizing people, that's code word for you're slandering people potentially because you're saying things about people that are that may not be true of them. That's what generalizations are. If I make a generalization about white people, it's wrong because not all white people fit that way. Not all people are monolithic, right? Not all this or that. So not all people who think there's something to systemic racism are monolithic. You're gonna have some people that think it's everything, and some people who say, you know what, I see some of that. So when you make generalizations about people, that's basically a code word for saying I may have slandered people And it was like, but that's okay because we're worried about this particular thing that they're doing. The Bible just doesn't give us the ability to do that. And that's where some of these guys, man, they just think too highly of themselves to think that they can do stuff like that. Now, that might be the only time he's done it. He might be a humble guy for real. I don't know, Jeff Durham. I don't know. But I just think it's stuff like that that's just like, man, I don't take y'all seriously, man, because you let yourself say and do these things and then criticize other people when they do something that's similar. And it's like, man, whatever.
Yeah. Generalizing, assuming, possibly slandering. We see.
I think it's slander, to be honest. I think when you generalize, like we did an episode called "The Myth of the Monolith," right?
Right.
So that monolithism is, I think that's slander when you generalize people like that. Mm-hmm. And when you say that, unless it's clear contextually what you're doing, like, if I say, like, there are times on my podcast when I say like white people, white evangelicals, I've said enough that I don't mean every person is like that. Right, and I try to make sure I say some white evangelicals it is, or large swaths of. I try to make sure that I'm not totalizing anyone when I say that, because people aren't monolithic, and the only thing we are monolithic in that we're people and that we sin. We need Jesus, but we're not monolithic in many of the ways that we function and act and think and all of this.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I watched the Ruslan interview that Dr. Eric Mason did with Ruslan. And after watching that, I walked away thinking to myself, and even in the middle of watching it, I was thinking, I think Dr. Mason is seriously misunderstood.
I think he's 100% misunderstood, bro.
Because, man, just getting to hear from his side, I'm going to be honest, a lot of the criticism that I've heard about his theology, the woke theology, and the things that come from that, I've heard it from the other side. And I made a promise to myself that from now on, I'm not going to just take people's word for it. I'm going to go and listen to it for myself, or else I'm not going to give a whole critique on it. Because a lot of times I'm finding when I go and check it out for myself, it's not as bad as what they said about it or what they said about it. What did you think when you were watching that interview on, and what is your thoughts on just, because a lot of that had to do with woke theology and like just everything else that is involved with this topic right here with the CRT and, certain black people, black preachers and churches like him being about race baiting and stuff like that. What did you think?
It's funny when I watched it. Well, me, I've been hip to this stuff for a minute. So I already knew that Eric Mason was misunderstood in many ways. He has said some things, though, that make people think that's how he carries it, because he's, but he's a human being. His feelings get hurt. He gets offended, stuff like that. It's the same. Like, it's funny, man, because like John MacArthur can say that social justice is the greatest threat to the gospel that he's ever seen, and can make a categorical statement like that. So social justice is greater than the threat of racism and all the stuff that created social justice. Like social justice is the child of historic racism from slavery to Jim Crow. And we're using a word. Sometimes we say racism or we call it partiality, right? Yeah. And we forget that James said, if you break one commandment, you've broken them all. So what we call chattel slavery and then Jim Crow, we sum it up into one word. But one word doesn't capture the gravity of what happened for those hundreds of years. And the reverberating consequences for that. Like, I don't know anyone who thought, even the Jews, bro, in the Old Testament, like the Jews were still affected by the consequences of Egypt and so forth. And God would remind them, like, we're affected by our fears. In Acts 18, Paul, you think Paul is like this mighty dude who just would walk into any situation and preach the gospel. And in Acts 18, you see God appears to Paul in a vision to say, listen, no one's going to harm you. Like, Paul was afraid of being harmed. He was literally afraid of being harmed. He's just a regular dude. He doesn't want to get stoned. He doesn't want to get beaten. He loves Jesus and he's willing to experience that, but he doesn't want to. And so God appeared to him in a dream, in a vision, and said, look, nobody's going to harm you, man. I got people in the city. Go preach the gospel. because he was afraid. Like these things are just real things about people, right? These are real realities. Yeah. And so when you think about, when we talk about racism, sometimes we minimize the wickedness in it because we describe it as one word, and we minimize the reverberating consequences that have come from it. That thing, like, it's funny, in Voddie's book, he talks about aftershocks. There were tons of aftershocks as a result of Jim Crow and slavery that still affect us today. Our country has not really recovered in some respects. And so when I think about the stuff that Eric Mason is talking about, I already knew that he was misunderstood on some level. I think he brought some clarity to what he thinks. It's clear that you just don't want to like the dude, and you don't want to like anything. And I don't know what this is, bro. And I have thoughts, and I'm not going to say them right now because I want to release them in literature, but there is something about the way Africans and African Americans have been treated in this country that people want to distance themselves away from, including the church. And the way that they try to do it is to, one, not talk about it, and not want Black people to talk about it. I don't know what it is, brother, because I don't hear, like, there's a U.S. senator in Louisiana right now. This happened 2 weeks ago. That Business Insider did a story and some other publications about this senator in Congress in a session is trying to pass a bill that does not allow America to be called systemically racist or sexist. And he said in his speech that we need to teach the good and the bad about slavery. And the person who was the lady, I think it's Hagliardi is her name, I think, something like that. She was like, Senator, there was no good in slavery. And then the people in the room like busted out laughing. Like, it's like, you idiot. Like, why would you think that? And to me, that's the type of stuff we're dealing with. You know, I've never heard them say, hey, listen, let's talk about the good of the Holocaust. Say again?
I said, there's no white blessing that comes from that.
Right. Like, what's the white blessing of the Holocaust? What's the good that comes out of the Holocaust? Like, they just don't say that. There's something about when it pertains to Black people. And I think in the church, we really, in the American Evangelical Church, we really want to give ourselves more credit than we deserve. Yeah. It's fascinating to me. Like, let me just give you one example of what I mean. So people who are not anti-woke folks, they will say systemic racism ended in the Civil Rights Act of 1964. That's what many of them would say. That's when it ended. The laws on the books changed. Many of them say that. Mm-hmm. Okay, they'll point to that. Even though they mocked the Lyndon Johnson administration for creating welfare and stuff, right? The Great Society, they mocked that, right? But they will point to that same administration and say they ended systemic racism. Mm. Now, one could ask, well, was the church racist as well? Was the church segregated at that time as well? And obviously, 100%. We all know the famous Martin Luther King line that the church is segregated. The most segregated hour in America is 11 a.m. Give or take. I mean, it was Sunday. What he was saying was churches are segregated, 100%. So here's the question then: when does systemic racism end in the church? If it ended in the world, like we can point to a day where we think systemic racism ended. Well, some do, all right? But where did it end in the church? I remember bringing this up in the panel discussion with Voddie and Tim, and Voddie said, 1995, the Southern Baptist resolution on racism. We repented. And then Tim Brindle acknowledged, with the PCA, we apologized and repented publicly around that same time, somewhere around there in the 90s. Yeah. Okay. Let's say that was genuine. We're not going to even evaluate the fruit of that repentance from 1995 until 2021. We won't even do that. Mm-hmm. But let's just say, if that's true, then you mean to tell me it took 31 years after unregenerated, sinful people who are not Christians, who do not have the Holy Spirit to bring about contrition. You mean to tell me it took 31 years for the biggest denomination, the most influential denomination, to apologize publicly and make a resolution for it? What are you talking about? And this is the stuff I mean. So again, I don't know what it is. So when I watched the Eric Mason interview, I didn't expect much less. I think he's an articulate brother. I think he's fighting a different fight. And I think his point was, I just want you to get out of our way. Get out of our way is what he was saying. And I think that these guys, they don't know how to do that, brother, because they feel such a strong desire. And I mean, Thomas Sowell is like, I don't know why he's a prophet for them. Some of Thomas Sowell's like perspective is just like, Thomas Sowell is a brilliant man that would blow me out of the water on economics. But I tell you what, brother, I got a couple of things for him. I poke a couple of holes. If an idiot like me can poke a couple of holes in his logic, then it's just fascinating to me. So I don't know what it is, man. I think these guys are going to hold this against Eric Mason because they just feel the need to. And I think they don't realize that while you're trying to teach people to contend for the faith, you're creating people who are contentious in the faith. And I think when you're contentious in the faith, you're contentious towards the faith, because Jesus does not call for you to be contentious in that way. So
I agree. So let's stay in the same realm then, as we're talking about blacks in the church. Now we're in the reform circles. We're in that kind of space right there.
Right.
Is the reform camp a good, healthy space for blacks?
So reform theology is. So when you say reform camp, that's different than reform theology, right? Mm-hmm. So reform theology, I think, is good stuff. Mm-hmm. The reform camp, those are, now you're talking about people who believe in reform doctrine and who are trying to apply it. Is that good for black people? Absolutely, it can be. Is there darkness in the reform camp? Absolutely, right? So, I think that's a fundamental problem that I see happening in the reform camp. There's a lot of things that are absent, that are presumed upon. Sound doctrine has given people blind sensibilities. And what I mean by that is people think because they have sound doctrine that they're good at everything. And let me give you an example. So if you meet a guy who has a PhD, once you hear someone has a PhD, you automatically think, wow, this dude's really smart, right? He got a PhD. Right. And we attribute to them a level of intelligence that's all across the boardwalk, right? But that person, it has a PhD and is very smart in what they study. That doesn't mean they're smart in everything. Like I know people in my church I have members of my church who are engineers. I mean, these are smart people, but I would run circles around them when it comes to Christianity, historic, present, understanding of the scriptures, application, verse memorization. They don't even know. I mean, they're people like, they're babes in Christ, but they're beasts in their fields. We tend to think people who have sort of platforms and things are more intelligent in what they do. And that's what sound doctrine is. Sound doctrine, typically Calvinist, right? We tend to think, and I don't consider myself a Calvinist because Calvin didn't write scripture. I'm a Paulinist, if anything. Calvin didn't write scripture. He had a chance to explain it when people didn't even have the ability to read because of the printing press and all of that stuff. Was people didn't have books, and there was a high lack of intelligence, right? I mean, people couldn't read. Illiteracy rate was crazy. So you needed someone to explain these things. So, sound doctrine, people who have it, who are typically reformed, we think that means we're straight in all areas, right? We have sound doctrine and sound living, and it's not the case. Those are two totally different sets of sort of rules, if you will, or modes of operation, right? Those are different, just modes of operation. So saying all that, black people can fit in reform spaces, but I think with any church you have to understand, like, how do you think through certain things, because a lot of us all think that we're biblical, and we don't think we're American. We think we're biblical, and that's just not true. We apply the Bible in our cultural context. I am a 21st century Black American. Now some people say, why don't you say, and I'm a Christian. Black American is a Christian. Why do you have to say black? Well, why does the Bible highlight that the woman was a Syrophoenician woman? and that the eunuch was Ethiopian, and that it was a Samaritan woman, and then it was. The Bible doesn't have a problem with ethnicity, man. I don't know why these people keep acting like the Bible has a problem with ethnicity. The Bible makes it clear that Simon from Cyrene, they want you to know that this dude is from Northern Africa, from Libya, right? And then you look at Acts 11, and it names all these nations and people who were. Acts 6, the deaconate was created because the Hellenistic widows were saying, we're not getting the same treatment as the Hebraic widows are. I mean, they make those distinctions for a reason. And so all of that to say, brother, I think there is a place for Black people in Reformed churches. I think we just have to be careful because, to be honest, and this is what bothers me a lot about this whole conversation, is that a lot of the reason why there was any diversity is because Black people, we set aside our Blackness to go to predominantly white churches and go to predominantly white conferences. We dealt with the historical baggage that we had to deal with because of the gospel. Like, don't think we didn't know that Puritans and Jonathan Edwards owned slaves. When I was getting discipled and we were reading books like Charity and Its Fruits by Jonathan Edwards, I knew that he owned slaves. We were reading Puritan books. We were reading stuff from George Whitefield and others. We knew that they owned slaves, but we set aside the uncomfortability of that because it was for the gospel. Like these churches didn't get diverse because white people migrated to predominantly Black churches. No, they were because Black people left sometimes predominantly Black churches to go to predominantly white churches because of the theology. We did it for the gospel. And I feel like this stuff that's all happening now is not the product of people being influenced by leftist narratives. Like, fam, we were in these churches trying to build deeper relationships. And what happened was less about critical race theory, and more about, hey man, we disagree on how to apply things culturally. You're telling me the things I care about or concerned about are not the gospel because they're Black issues, but you don't realize the issues you care about are very much your cultural context. And it's not wrong to do that. It's not wrong to feel that way. I mean, what is, anyways, I mean, I could go on for that. I just think a lot of this stuff is it's just interesting, man. And I think Black people can be in Reformed spaces. I think we should be, for real. But I think we just have to understand who are the people that we're going to be around. And if there's going to be predominantly white, cool. Do I have the real conviction to make that kind of sacrifice? And some people are like, nah, it's a struggle. Just like white people ain't in a rush to go. Most of the churches that are diverse are not led by Black pastors.
Right.
I am one of the few, Eric.
I was going to say, you might be one of the anomalies.
I'm one of the anomalies with my church. And I got people that look like Gandalf in my church. And I got people that look like me, tatted up, young ex-gangsters in my church, with people who look like, like one of the Golden Girls. You know what I'm saying? So again, that's a blessing to have that. But that's not normal, fam. Normally when churches are diverse, a white man leads that church. Yeah. And I'm not saying there's wrong or right with that. I'm just saying that's just reality. That's not critical theory. That's just reality. And so
you notice these things. We can notice these things. So
hey, why not? They notice what we do. They notice the crime rate. They notice all of this. They notice we don't have fathers in the home. They notice all that. They notice abortion. They notice all of that. Why can't we notice these things? It's just like it's just weird, man.
Yeah.
And that's what's really happening, brother. Is that what's happening is because of the lack. What God is. If you look at what God's revealing, instead of thinking about who's critical race theory and who's not, just step back and be like, what is God revealing? Like, why is he letting this happen? What's happening here? What is God? So when I answer that question, I think, okay, Ephesians 5:11. What is the darkness that God is exposing? And it's not darkness on one side. The left is off. They wild. The left, many people on the left and who side with Black Lives Matter and all of them folks are tripping. A lot of them are very bitter, and their application is more vindictive. You want to take away personal responsibility because of historic injustice.
Right.
And that's not biblical either. But then the other side is just self-righteous, and they just think they're better because they think their policies are better. But you honestly, you don't love the Imago Dei either because you look down on people. This is why they're quick to denigrate someone's character after they die to disprove stupid narratives. Stupid. I mean, it's just there's no. It's not. These aren't biblical in any way, shape, or form, fam. The Bible, if it's biblical, you're gonna look at everything and be like, oh, there's a problem here. There's a problem here. You're not gonna be like, oh, on your side, this is the problem. On our side, because we don't agree with abortion, so we're better than you. It's like, nah, you're not, man. Nah, you're not. You ain't no better. So it's just, man, it's just crazy. I think black people should go to these churches, but I think we just have to know what we're getting into.
Blacks being in white spaces. That the reason that it led me there because of what you said about the PCA and the SBC, and those tend to be more whites in those spaces right there. But black people are migrating into those spaces right there, and that's why I bring up Reformed Church. You know what I mean? Because those are Reformed denominations right there. Now, I heard someone propose this one. Because of all of these problems that we're seeing happen when it comes to the integration in these spaces, what do you think about black Reformed churches? Because the black church came about, the black church in general in America came about because they were not allowed to be in white churches, right? They had to form their own churches, and we see the Bethel AMEs and all of that stuff come from that right there. What do you think about black Reformed churches having that type of space come about?
So I don't think any church should say another ethnicity cannot be a part of our church.
Right.
If you do, then you are not a church that belongs to Jesus.
Okay. All right. Okay. Good.
Now, if you're saying we're going to start a church and we want black people who reform to be in it, and that's probably going to happen if the leadership is black, just to be honest with you.
Yeah.
If the leadership is black and planting a church, starting a church, you can almost best believe the majority of the people in that church are going to be black.
Yeah.
So it's going to happen by osmosis, by default, for real. So I don't think there's something wrong with wanting to start a church. I mean, isn't that what we do? We go to our communities and we plant churches. I don't think it's wrong to think we want to plant a black Reformed church. If you think that way, I don't think the black part of it needs to be neon or anything, but I just think you're going to plant a church where you want a different, a type of ethnic flavor to that, and there's no sin in that. Mm-hmm. There's no sin in that. Yeah. I think if it's saying these people can't come, then I think we have a problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with that, and to take it even further with this whole black Reformed church, my whole problem with anything black is two main things. I mean, I can name a whole bunch of things, but two main things is that one, it's impossible. And let me explain that one by impossible. And then number two is that it's just, it becomes almost like, a private club, you only blacks in this church. So this is my problem with the whole impossible part of it, is that, first of all, we know what today is. Like, we know what's going on today. Blacks are not just staying with blacks. So even if you start this church off with just black, one of them brothers, one of them sisters is going to come in that church with their significant other.
Right.
And what does that mean? That means that pretty soon it's not going to be an all black church, even if you start off like that. It's the same thing with, people saying this whole, black anything really. How do you define black? Like reparations. How can you give reparations to all blacks, and most of us are mixed anyway? So what defines black? Like what percentage of black is black? You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Like, all it takes is for one couple to have a mixed baby, and there you go.
Right, yeah.
That church is no longer all black, or that business is no longer all black.
And mixed kids are the most beautiful anyway, as they say, right?
Exactly, right? I'm mixed, man. I'm mixed. Thank you, brother.
My kids are.
Yeah.
No.
Absolutely. Most people don't even know that I'm black and Puerto Rican. You know what I mean?
Right.
So mixed.
You said that to some people, they be like, Mente Rosa, man. They ain't want to hear that, man. They don't believe.
No, they don't want to hear that. So my whole black, my whole problem with black anything is just, one, it's impossible, and then two, you just start making it like privatized, and some people start, I
just think it's unbiblical though. I just don't think we should think about. I don't think if you're going to plant a church or start a church in the area, the demographics of that area are going to be probably what's drawn to you, or the leadership. It's always going to be about who's leading a church. People, that's what it is. Yeah. It's about the leadership. It's going to be about the leadership of that church. And I remember when I took over at my church, I had been there 6 years. So I'd already been established. It wasn't like I came in and they didn't know me. I was 6 years in. When I took over, there were a couple people that left. Not many, but a couple white families left. And some went on the church plan. I don't mean who went on the church plan. Cool. But there was some people say, hey man, we think we're gonna leave, the church is changing. And it's like, ain't nothing changing. I'm just taking over leading. You've been in the same church for 6 years. Like, what's actually changing? Is it I'm taking over now? You don't have, you see me come up and be a leader and disciple your children and so forth, and more than you did in some cases, So it's just fascinating that stuff happens. But I don't see it as in the eternal sense. Like, I don't want to have a church, to be honest, it's predominantly anything. And I'm blessed to be able to have just a diverse church. I love it because it keeps you on your toes. If I had an all black church, I might where everyone's like agreeing with me and riding on, I'll just miss stuff, man. I'll be in there doing wild stuff. And it's like, nah, man, the fact that there's white people in my church, I'm accountable to these folks. I got to be balanced, man. I can't be in there talking about white people need to listen up. You've never heard me preach something like that. Ain't nobody saying that. It's just that you say, I ain't doing that. That's not what the pulpit is for to me. That's what Curt Kennedy's for. I can do that on my podcast. I can do it in my writing. Right. I can do it in music. In the pulpit, I ain't doing that, man. I'm not doing that. I'm trying to be faithful. So yeah, I just think it's unbiblical, man. Revelation 7 and eternity just shows like, man, we're going to be together. But what I also think is unbiblical is acting like ethnicity is a problem because God turned down the wall of hostility. Hey, listen, fam. Africans didn't build the wall of hostility back up. White people did. So like, let's not act like the wall of hostility that you quoting from Ephesians 2 that he tore down, y'all built it back up. So it's like, we didn't do it. Black people didn't do that. We didn't build the wall of hostility up. So why you preaching to us about saying there's hostility or reacting to it when we ain't build it? You know what I'm saying? We didn't build that wall up. And again, when it comes to race or, particularly with black people, there's always this sense of, if you're reformed, you agree with a paradigm called already not yet. It means there are promises that have been given that we experience some in this life to some measure. Like, so the Holy Spirit, right? Romans 8. The Holy Spirit is the first fruits, right? So we got a measure of the Holy Spirit already, but the complete sort of the sense and the fulfillment is not yet. But for some reason, when it comes to race, we act like the gospel has already done all the work necessary. I have no idea why. Like, why is race is not in the already not yet category? So when we talk about it, when we see it, when we bring things up, it's we're out of step because Jesus dealt with that. Yeah, on the cross, and then America built it back up. As Trump said, build the wall. And the conservatives yelling build the wall, that's exactly what happened spiritually. You built the wall up, and we've been the ones tearing it down. I mean, white people have too, but not to the same measure, man. So this stuff is just funny to me, man. It's like, man, God is going to say some things on Judgment Day, boy. I tell you what.
Absolutely. The other day, as I was preparing this outline, things that I wanted to ask you, I was thinking to myself, man, I don't know where I heard this. I don't know where I watched it, whatever. It might have been Thomas Sowell, somebody. They were bringing up the fact that today, it seems like in the black communities and even in black churches, what used to happen isn't happening anymore, which is that holding blacks accountable for what's happening in the communities. Do you think that pastors, do you think that community leaders in the black community and those type of spaces, do you think that they're no longer holding blacks accountable and they're making them feel more like victims?
Well, I don't know. How do they measure that? Like, what's the measuring stick for that? Like, those kinds of statements to me, like, what does that mean? How do you give me some empirical data that makes that point? Like, I don't. Right. Because you see a couple pastors online that say some stuff and you think like, oh, because more black. This is what I. So, black people in the church, black Christians, as I was saying earlier, we were the ones who primarily migrated to white spaces, white churches, or whatever. Particularly in the Young, Restless, and Reform camp. I know I was a part of, I rapped at John Piper's church. I was the first one to rap there in 2006, and that opened the door up to Reform rap. And then all of a sudden, it just kind of took off after that. And then Shaolin and Lecrae and different people just kind of blew up, and it was like we were accepted, and it was like, oh man, we love this. It's like 4-minute sermons, and white people were eating it up, and artists, we were benefiting from the acceptance of the broader white reformed culture. We've crossed those lines and have done those things, but there is a degree in which black people are, in some senses, rightly frustrated. And it's not so much just because, but there is like, brother, we are still today, like I'm talking about today, still today, like the Republican, the senator in Louisiana, we are still today trying to get solidarity on the fact that slavery was evil. And people say, of course it was, but you excuse the theology because you like the theology. You call them men of their times. Like, I still don't hear these guys denounce that. I heard one guy, Phil Johnson, who is John MacArthur's right-hand man, say that R.L. Dabney is his favorite theologian. And he said he struggles with the fact that he has some, there was some racist language. That Bama didn't have some racist language. His whole theology was based on racism. And that's your favorite theologian. Out of all the theologians, you can't pick one that wasn't racist. So again, we're dealing with this kind of rhetoric, even though we've sacrificed and gone to predominantly white churches for the sake of the gospel. And we still get told these things. Like, these things get weaponized. When you hear about Father, what, if you can, what, and I'm saying conservatives because they're usually the ones that say this. What conservatives do you know of that have proposed a solution to fatherlessness in the home?
To follow what?
To fatherlessness. Like what?
To fatherlessness.
Yeah.
Yes.
What solution have any of these people proposed? James White, who loves to tweet about it and bring that up.
He talks a lot about the black church in general, which is crazy to me.
In general. Well, his name is James White. It means something. So like, and I'm joking when I say that. But I'm joking sort of.
But he's best friends with Michael Brown, right?
Right, exactly.
Oh.
So man. Again, to me, like, fam, like, where does the Bible do? Like, Jesus. Like, what does that mean? Like, where's the solution? Like, how is that biblical, brother? What solutions do you offer? You don't. What solutions do you offer about abortion? What solutions do you offer about? No, what you don't is what you do is you point these things out and you weaponize them. And black people, we're not stupid, fam. We're not just not monolithic. We're also not stupid. We see what's happening, and people are just getting tired of it. So what I think is happening is that black people are speaking up more now out of frustration and disappointment and hurt, and a lack of trust. Like, if I were, and this is me personally, this is me, based on a lot of like what I've seen the Southern Baptists do and all of this stuff and all these seminars, I wouldn't go to one of these joints right now. I wouldn't go just because I don't want to feel like I can't struggle with some things about being black in this culture and be labeled, that's critical theory or critical this or critical that. As if it's just like, nah. Just like the Hellenistic Jews struggle, they say, look, to be honest, what the Hellenistic Jews is really saying is we think y'all giving favoritism to the Hebraic Jews because we are Greek. And there's room for that, man. There's room to struggle with those things. And I feel like you can't do that. So I don't know if churches are not holding their people accountable. I think what's happening though is people are just more frustrated because we would think like, dang, why are we still trying to say that this stuff is affecting us? Why are you telling me and using Thomas Sowell to try to point out that what I'm saying I experience, and now it's called critical race theory, it's social justice. Why are you trying to pigeonhole me into that? But the fact that you say I don't fit the narrative means you have a different experience, right?
Yeah.
So why is your experience matter and mine doesn't? And that's where we find ourselves. I think people are frustrated. Are pastors doing that? I don't know. I don't have any data to show that.
Yeah, I think the core of a lot of these arguments, the misunderstanding behind Eric Mason, woke theology, just all of these conversations and arguments that are happening, I think it's because of particular people not knowing, not being aware, or misunderstanding how inner city missions works. Like, what it's like to minister to people in the city, what it's like to minister to people in communities that are not like the ones they grew up in or they pastor in. Like, most of these people that have a problem with Eric Mason and them, a lot of them don't pastor in big cities where a lot of black people are.
I've noticed
proximity,
bro. They don't, yeah.
It's them being away from it, not being aware, and misunderstanding. Because a lot of what they're saying ain't gonna work if they bring that to the hood. It's not gonna work.
You know what it is theologically, what you're talking about theologically? What it is, or let me say biblically. What you're describing biblically is a misunderstanding of the what's missing is a robust treatment on 1 Corinthians 12 and explaining the body analogy well. The point, one of the main points of that is that God has created the body to serve different functions. And that means the arm is going to do, the people who are sort of the arm, if you will, they're going to have a different function than the foot is. And God said, look, it's all the body, but you're going to function differently. And what you see happening in the culture on both sides, you got on the left, they want everyone to focus on racism and be anti-racism and all of that. And it's like, listen, fam, it's a lot of smoke out there. I ain't worried about just that. Like, that's not like I've told you this before. I appreciate I really do about your church and how seriously you take abortion in terms of, I see videos of Los driving to the clinic and stuff, him and Lynette and others. Cool. Bang with it. I've never done that in my life. I don't even feel a call to do that or a conviction to do that. Does that mean I don't care about abortion? Nah, it's not true. But I don't feel called to do it like that. Right. I have other things I care. You know why? Because it's okay. We want people at abortion clinics preaching and doing this. We want people highlighting injustices in criminal law because we want God's righteousness to bear there. We want Christians in politics. You might be the left foot. We want people doing overseas missions. You might be the right foot. We want people that work for Red Cross and stuff. And because you're the right arm, we want people to be calling out and seeing injustice in certain places because you're the right eye. We want people to be focusing on, the challenges of homosexuality, infiltrating the church, and you the left eye. We want all of that. And what we're saying is, hey, if you're not a foot, then you're not a part of the body. It's 100% the analogy that Paul laid out in 1 Corinthians 12. If you don't care about abortion more than this, or if you care about black people being killed by police more than this, it's just like, fam, I'm allowed to care about what I want to care about. Like, I don't have to care about the same things you do. And I think that's both sides. I don't think everybody should make racism the top of their list. It's like, nah, I don't think so. And I don't think everybody should make, going after the black, black people care about black on black crime. But the thing is the difference is, look, if two black people kill each other, the expectations aren't there. But when a police officer does it, there's a different expectation because of the role you play in society. There's a difference. Like, let me give you, I think I said this before, let me give you a graphic example. If a man rapes a woman, right, it's a terrible thing. You hear about it, you're like, dang, you worry for your wife. Hey, baby, you need to be careful when you go out because there's something going, it just was going to bother you, right? If a man rapes a woman. If her father rapes her, though, if it's her father, like, look at that. Now, see that face you made? You made that face for a reason, right?
Right.
Why? Because it means something different because of who her dad is, right? Absolutely. It's one thing to hear this woman got raped. That's bad enough. It's another thing to hear that it was her dad. You know why? Because of his role, his position. It means more when you do it. And this is what I do not understand about the conversation on slavery and Jim Crow. We know that slavery has been around in every human generation in the world and every ethnic. The problem is not slavery. The problem is not racism. The problem is that people who profess to believe in Jesus did it. That's the problem. The people who said that we live for the freedom in Christ use that freedom to enslave other people. That's what makes America unique. It's not slavery in and of itself. It's been everywhere. We see that. We know that we saw it in the Bible, in Exodus. We see it. We know that exists. That's not what we're talking about. Right. It's that Christians allowed for it. When an officer kills a kid, especially if it looks like he didn't need to, of course there's going to be more outrage because you're a police officer. Right. They used to call them peace officers. You are a peace officer, fam. And you're out here more aggressive than the dudes that we was fighting with. That's why we get outraged. When black people kill black people, I don't have expectations for you. But I do for you, officer. You do for me as a pal. You know why Ravi Zacharias' sin was such a big deal? Because he was a minister. He was.
Yep.
How many of these dudes in Hollywood do the same thing that Ravi Zacharias did? We don't care about it.
Right.
I mean, what's his name? The dude who used to run Playboy, Hugh Hefner. This dude was 80 years old, married to 4 or 5 blondes, and had to use a pump to get his thing up so he could have sex with them. No one cares about Hugh Hefner. When he died, he's in hell unless he repented. No one cared about that, right? But when Ravi Zacharias did it, we were outraged. Why? Because of who you are.
Yeah.
Police officers are different than the average nigga on the street. And so you cannot equate the two and say you shouldn't be outraged at this and should be more outraged at this. It's like, listen, I have at different expectations for this officer than I do for this dude in the corner. And that's what I just don't understand why they don't get that.
Straight up. No,
I don't get it.
It's definitely different expectations for where you are position wise.
Crazy, bro. I just don't understand that. Especially I just don't get it, bro.
No.
I mean, I do get it, but I just think it's sad to me.
It is.
I do get it, but it's just sad to me to think like, you think we're talking about slavery and racism? We're talking about the church and its complicity and large swaths of the church. You ever heard these dudes say, well, then I guess we should just throw out the Bible then because David committed adultery and he wasn't sinless and we can't follow him. Dudes, we were saying this, and I was just like, fam, David's sin didn't inspire other men to have sex with other men's wives and then have those men killed to hide it. All the sins in the Bible are largely individual sins that may have had some influence corporately.
Yeah.
Now the sins that where people were influenced. Now think about this for a second. Let's go here for a second, right? So in the Bible, when the king's sins inspired other people to commit the same sin, God judged that. Definitely. In fact, in Matthew, I think Jesus talks about this. Remember he said, whoever convinces one of these little children to sin, right? It said it'd been better that a millstone would be tied around his neck or that he had never been born, right? It's like, woe to the person who, there's a difference between you committing sin and you influencing other people to sin. Big difference. These theologians influenced other people to sin for generations or justify it because they were okay with it. Yeah. Despite that you had men like Charles Spurgeon and others saying that this is a damnable one. Like Charles Spurgeon, he thinks you didn't make it to heaven if you own slaves. Shoo. Charles Spurgeon said it was a damnable one. Like you'll be damned if you do that. Charles Spurgeon wasn't playing. So again, it's just like that's the reality that we're talking about right here. We're talking about men who were believers, brother, who influenced other Christians for generations to come. So much so that even today, dudes will make excuses for their sinfulness and the influence that it had on other men and act like we are being overreacting because the reverberating consequences of that stuff. Yeah. You gotta be kidding me.
The Jews are still affected today by the Holocaust.
Fam, the Jews are still receiving reparations because of the Holocaust.
Oh my gosh.
I could give you 2 articles right now that are dated as recent as 2017 that Poland, Austria, and Germany have paid out billions in reparations to Holocaust survivors and their families. And the U.S. brokers those did. The U.S. is the one who's responsible to make sure that the families get the money, particularly those that are in the U.S. But I think it does it for all of them. The U.S. does that. Okay, so black people are wrong then in saying, hey, we're wrong for that? Like reparations is somehow unbiblical? If we call it restitution, does that make it right? Then if reparations is unbiblical, then why are Germany, Poland, and Austria giving people from the Holocaust? Why was there a war tribunal, right? The Nuremberg trials in the 40s, I think it was 44. Why was there a trial and all of that because of the atrocities that happened to them? But in America, we celebrate those atrocities because it's part of American history. Do you know in Europe, it is a federal offense to deny the Holocaust? Excuse me. Deny the Holocaust, and it's a federal offense. Look, somebody's like, oh, okay, well, I don't care if it's COVID. I'm watching this on TV through YouTube. It was a federal offense to deny the Holocaust and a federal offense to brandish a swastika and celebrate it. Even Europe had enough sensibilities to know we can't do this. This is not a good look for our history. In America, we celebrate that. One of my favorite shows as a kid was called The Dukes of Hazzard. And it was about this white family that was running from the law all the time. Bo and Luke Duke. They drove an orange, like Dodge Charger with a Confederate flag on the side. The car was called the General Lee. And the flag was the Confederate flag. Wow. Google this. One of my favorite shows as a kid. I had no idea. And the theme song, just the good old boys, wouldn't change it they could. Didn't even know about it. And it was we celebrated that. And that wasn't just down south. I was watching that in DC. So again, yeah, brother, I know I'm all over the place because all of this is in my mind. You know, I'm writing about these things and it's here. So I apologize if I'm just kind of
it makes us flow right into the next topic, which is you coined the term theolitics. Theolitical. I think you need to copyright that, by the way.
Yeah, man, you said that. I'm thinking about I need to hit my man.
What do you mean by that? And what ways are we seeing this play out now? What ways have we seen it play out?
All right, so theolitical is what I mean, like the gospel, what I think the church inherited. So when I make these statements, I think about what did we inherit, right? Because we often say we stand on the shoulders of those who have gone before us. And so we love the theology that we got from these dudes, right? But for some reason, we don't want to act, we pretend like we didn't inherit the bad things about them, the bad perspectives, we didn't inherit the consequences of their words or their actions that damage the church. Like, brother, let me tell you something. If the church, I'm talking about the evangelical church, whoever that is now, if we just said, hey man, let's not talk about justice, let's talk about, do we think as if we evaluate the fruit of gospel preaching, do we think we've really honored the Lord? I think if the church said, listen, the name of God, Romans 2:24, the name of God has been blasphemed among the Gentiles because of you. I think if we rallied around that and made everything about the glory of God and his name, rather than am I not a racist, we would get some work done, right? But the church has always been intertwined with politics. I don't know how much you noticed, but the American Revolution was also dubbed the Presbyterian War. Now, Presbyterian was a broad term used by the King of England and others because it meant, England had a national church, right? The Church of England. It was Anglican. So when they fought back, a lot of people who were Reformed, they were not Anglican, they were Reformed. They called either, if you were Reformed, if you were a Calvinist, if you were a Congregationalist, which is a Baptist, and if you were just, as long as you weren't an Anglican, they called you a Presbyterian, and they dubbed it a Presbyterian war, a religious war. So the Bible has Christians, and the Bible, I have a book behind me called Sacred Scripture, Sacred War, that details particular sermons that were used by politicians and pastors to incite men to risk giving their lives up to fight in what we call the American Revolution. So the Bible and Christianity has always been tethered to things. The establishment of America as a nation has been tethered to Christianity. Now, Christianity is America is no Christian nation. The Treaty of Tripoli, Article 11, makes that very clear. That makes that very clear that America is not a Christian nation. That was signed by the president and by Congress. Makes it very clear in the Treaty of Tripoli. I think it was like 1887, 1787. So, but America was the only real religion that had any validity in America. Christianity was the only religion, and so a lot of the laws and things that were passed favored the Judeo-Christian sort of perspective. Even if men weren't necessarily Christians, they were deists or some theists. So America has tied itself closely to the political side, and instead of distancing itself and making a moral stance on slavery, it allowed, and not just slavery. People sometimes act like when we talk about slavery, we're just talking about making people work against their will. We're talking about whipping, raping women, killing men, creating orphans and widows instead of caring for them. We're talking about taking women's kids. I mean, the slave masters would have sex with women, they'd get pregnant, and then they'd sell those kids into a mother's heartache to watch her 12-year-old son and daughter be put on the chopping block to never see them again. I mean, we're not talking about just the making someone work long hours against their will. We're talking about a psychological and physical trauma, right? And then spiritual, if you add the fact that the church there was Christians, a lot of them who would do this. Yeah. So the church has always been intertwined with the political structure, and it's never really been a clean gospel. Like, it's always been connected to the politics of slavery and stuff. So going forward, the church has always submitted itself. This is why it makes me laugh when people be like, oh, the government, that's not what the purpose of government is. But that, you're saying that now, but historically the church allowed the government to do a lot of the things. The whole separation of church and state that Thomas Jefferson came up with and talked about in 1802 to the National Baptist Association, he was just basically saying, we're not going to establish a national or denominational entity for everyone that they have to agree with. That's what it was for. It wasn't about, we're not going to be connected politically, even though there were a lot of Christians that necessarily weren't in politics, but they allowed for politics to take over. That's the gospel we've inherited. We inherited a theological and a political gospel, right? And that's what you see happening. There's so much confidence in the political realm. And here's the big one. Because the church didn't bring about change, the church looked to the government to bring about change. The church didn't listen. Slavery didn't end on the contrition coming from the cross of Christ, and neither did Jim Crow. Because if slavery ended on the contrition of the church, then the church would have repudiated Jim Crow. You see what I'm saying? So
yes,
it wasn't that these things took shape. So we didn't inherit from our ancestors in America a Christianity founded on orthodoxy and orthopraxy. What we inherited was just preach the gospel, but ignore the morality of the gospel. And that's what we're dealing with. So people have been in politics all this time. Politics has been the thing that even the church cares about and needs to change. Fast forward to right now, what are we talking about? It's all political. Everything is like, it's the left and it's the right, and now we call it Christian nationalism. I don't like that term, because that's too associated with Trump and to the Capitol insurrection. That's too recent. We're talking about theological gospel that has been around since the beginning, fam. Since the beginning, the church has incorporated itself in the political dealings of the world and have benefited from it. But now we're in a place where religion is multifaceted. So now, as a result of the branding of the land of the free, the home of the brave, you have people who are free to practice religion all over the place. And what's happening now is the government cannot sustain doing things just for Christians, because that offends these people. Right. And so now it looks like, oh, the left is coming after the church. Nah, in all actuality, the left is being faithful to the actual Declaration of Independence that all people, it's not Christianity anymore. And so now there's this, there's so many things that are connected. So I talk too much. So the point I'm making is that America and the church has inherited a gospel that has been politically driven more than it's been biblically driven. Okay. And that's where we find ourselves at today. So that's why a lot of the issues go back to politics and not scripture. This is why even in the critical race theory conversation, no one can tell you how to repent of white privilege biblically. What is white privilege? Don't tell me what you should. What is white privilege biblically? What is white supremacy? What is white fragility biblically? What is what is being woke? Like, what is God requiring of me? Am I going to hell for being a social justice warrior? What does that mean? What, all these terms don't have any biblical definition because they're all political. They're all political terms now. And this is where we find ourselves as a church. It's not. That's why I said in my writings, this isn't about biblical justice versus social justice, brother. This is conservative justice versus liberal justice. And each of those, conservative justice hates liberals and liberals hates so they will not budge. So even though the liberal justice makes some good points at times, conservatives cannot bend, because if you give in to liberals, then you've committed the unpardonable sin. And the liberal justice cannot bend. So even though conservative justice makes some good points about stats and crime rates and responsibility, liberal justice says that we will not. No, you're blaming the victim. It is oppression, is rape. They're going to fight because they cannot give in to the other side. And we see Christians doing the same thing. And it ain't just Christians on the left, brother. It's the same thing. It's theological. It's not biblical. And that's why I say that. This is what I see happening. This is why I'll never choose a side. It's a joke to me to choose a side. You're right.
Stay balanced.
Stay balanced. Stay balanced. These people are kidding me, man.
So there's been a rise in the church as we're talking about all of this, because a lot of this amounts to people digging deeper, right? That's what I feel like we're in this stage in America, in the world, in the church, especially as blacks, where, we're digging deeper. We can't just take any person's, word as actually fact. We have to look into it for ourselves. We're seeing the rise of the black scholar, and I would say the rise of the black Christian scholar. You got guys like, and Damon Richardson, I'm hoping to have him on the podcast soon. Jerome Gay, Vince Bantu, Isaiah Robertson, just a whole list. And I would absolutely put you in the same category, which is guys that know what they're talking about. And they don't fit the stereotype, which is, black Christians don't care about looking into this source and that source. Black people just care about hooping and hollering. Like, what is your thoughts on the rise of the black Christian scholar, where we're exposing white Christianity, we're exposing, myths of the monolith, if you will, things of that nature?
The more the merrier, brother. It's been a lot of black scholars for a long time. If we want to keep it 100, Origen, Tertullian, Athanasius, Augustine.
Yes.
Like, these was black. I mean, first of all, white, a lot of the European theology came on the backs of these men. Origen was the one who came up with the Trinity. Augustine, most of his theology was adopted by the Reformation. Martin Luther got his ecclesiology of the church from Michael the Ethiopian. He called the Ethiopian church the purest display of Christianity he's ever seen. These is all Africans. You know what I'm saying? Like Simon of Cyrene, the man who actually helped Jesus carry his cross, was from Africa. They want you to, they didn't just say, now again, they're saying Simon of Cyrene to designate from all the other people named Simon, right? There's a lot of people named Simon, I'm sure.
Right.
But they making it clear, because one lady says Simon of Cyrene, and then it says Alexander and Rufus's dad. They want to make sure you know who he is, but Cyrene played a major role in the gospel being spread. Matter of fact, Mark traditionally went to Africa to preach the gospel. You know what I'm saying? So the Europeans, they're the ones who killed Jesus. The Europeans killed him. The Africans helped them carry the cross. So when we talk about African scholars, let's not start with the names you just named. Let's go back and realize that the foundation of European theology comes from the back of African scholars. So I categorically reject the idea that slavery was needed so black people would come to Christ. No, we taught Europeans how to think about and categorize Christ. So I categorically reject that. So having said
what do you mean by that? Explain that for people that are listening right now. We taught Europeans how to, what was that? How did you phrase that?
How to categorize Christianity.
Okay.
The doctrine that came from the early church fathers, some of the most important doctrines of our day. Yes. The Trinity, the Nicene Creed, the Bible coming together was the result of Athanasius and Pelagianism and semi-Pelagianism, and them fighting to prove the deity of Christ, right? It was always about the deity of Christ, and that was the kind of the center of a lot of the early church. So they created these creeds. It created the scriptures, came as a result to that. So these are all African men. I mean, Augustine he was from Africa. Like, he wasn't European.
Right.
And so again, and then you think about the importance of Egypt. The importance of Egypt in God's plan. Like, the importance of Africa. Egypt is Africa. Like, that's the continent of Africa. Like, the importance of Africans is significant to God's plan of redemption. Moses married an Ethiopian. So you see throughout that there's this important reality for Africa as a continent to play a role in God's plan. Then you see, as the early church fathers are developing their doctrine and theology, some of the main one. I mean, Augustine is arguably one of the most influential theologians of all time. I mean, people read City of God, and they get a lot of their theology from him. I mean, Martin Luther and Calvin, man, Augustine was everything to those dudes. So again, Augustine was an African. His theology, the theology that God revealed to him, helped shape what we call the Reformation, which has been dawned as more European theology.
Right.
So that's what I mean. Like, they shaped those categories. They were categories that were given to these men to help them put these things in place to be able to teach what they now teach and what we know as Reformed theology and so forth.
Yeah, that's good. The more the merrier, right?
I think, yeah. I mean, there should be. Why should there only be one ethnic group who's strong in scholarship? Like, nah, I can read. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like, you can read. Like, it's I know how to read and think by the grace of God. And I'm supposed to use those skill sets for his glory. So why not? I think I'm glad to see these brothers speaking up. And the sad part is in the culture that we're in, we have to make it be something that it's not. Like, we have to make it now everything you say is about, critical justice or this or that. It's like there's always something. There's always some kind of name or idea or reality that that just does its thing. It's just, once again, it's just like, okay. So yeah, I think we need more of those. I don't think there's nothing wrong with having black scholars. I consider myself an intelligent ex-gangster, intelligent hoodlum.
Nah, that's good, man. We're going to start to conclude this part of it. Now, I do have extra content for the ones that are Patreon supporters. I'm going to be asking Curt some other questions. And I got some good questions. Ones that are not going to be on this episode. Again, this is going to be exclusively those that are part of the Patreon. So let's start to conclude this series up. Black is King. Today is part 3. But we've done 2 other parts. Let's start to conclude this a little bit. Let's maybe add some plugs in there. Curt the podcaster, Curt the social media man. What's going on in that realm of your life?
So, Curt the podcaster and Curt the social media man. So I mentioned this earlier that I don't bring certain things into the pulpit on Sunday. And that's intentional. So the podcast, doing things like this, my Substack, curtkennedy.substack.com. I have a newsletter where I write on these things, Twitter, Facebook, all of those, music, making albums, all of those things provide me the outlet to express the concerns and things that I see and that I have in the culture. So I don't want to do that in the pulpit because, to be honest, not to put Eric Mason on the spot again, but he put it out there. I don't want to do what he did. I don't want to be, and I haven't by God's grace. I don't want to do what he did. Well, you talking like that, and that's not. I
talking like that, then have to apologize.
Yeah, I don't want to do that. So for me, these other avenues, and my church understands that their pastor has more of a platform than just being at this church. I mean, I came there as a man who traveled and spoke and did things. So the church has always embraced the fact that their pastor has a little bit more of a responsibility outside of our church. And so that these other avenues, they give me space to do those things and and to say what I won't say in the pulpit because I'm not bringing that there.
Right. That's good. And you are on where, social media wise? I know you're on Twitter.
Yeah, so I'm on Twitter. I'm Curt Kennedy. No apostrophe, just I. The letter I, the letter M, and then Curt Kennedy. I'm there on Twitter, trying to change the world one tweet at a time, trying to bring some smoke one tweet at a time. So
you're on Facebook, not as much.
I post stuff on Facebook. I've been doing it more lately. It's funny, man. I developed my Instagram. So my Instagram is Curt Kennedy. I'm Curt Kennedy. But that's mostly photography. I do photography on the side, and I really worked hard to develop that one. I didn't really pay attention to Twitter, man. And so now I really like the platform of Twitter. Like I'm really trying to, about last August, I started to pay a little bit more attention. And so I've been grateful for the followers that I've grown, almost 2,000 since last August. I've been grateful for that, but I do like that platform better. I'd love to develop that platform and have a bigger voice on Twitter. But I'm on Facebook. My real name is actually Curt Allen. Kennedy is a stage name. Mm-hmm. And so I have a Facebook page. Curt Allen is the most active. I don't really use Curt Kennedy that much in terms of Facebook. Mm-hmm. And then obviously we have the Cross Examine Facebook page. We just post stuff on the show and different things here and there.
How long is your season gonna be? You guys got like 39 episodes this season.
So we basically go from late September to end of July.
Oh, okay.
This is a season for us because I go on sabbatical every August. My church graciously lets me take a month off to just hang with my family, refresh, and all of that. So I don't record a podcast. Like what we did last year for the Patreon was we recorded some briefer episodes that we only uploaded like the first 40 minutes of an episode. So what we did was we recorded a couple of them towards the end so we could just post them. We made them about hip hop and not about culture because it might not be relevant,
Right.
So we did that, and we'll probably do that again for our Patreon supporters. But we take a sabbatical when I go on sabbatical. So I come back, I take August off, and then I come back in September. But we take about 2 weeks, so we take about 6 weeks off, and then we come back second half of September, ready to go.
Got you. That's good.
Yeah,
That's
so
good.
I enjoy it. I mean, the time off is good. I enjoy it. I enjoy the podcast, and the Lord has been gracious to us to let us have, some followers and some people really like checking us out. So I've been grateful for that.
How about Curt the writer? And let's start with music and then move to blogging.
So Curt the writer is a combination between Curt Allen and Curt Kennedy. And I'm using those two monikers because I'm obviously the same person, but it's just two different ways of thinking sometimes. Like as Curt Allen, that's more who I am as a pastor. And I more try to make sure that I think my pastoral sensitivities are more aware when I'm Curt Allen. But when I'm writing, depends on what I'm writing. And I'm writing, the reason why I say it's a combination between the two is because like when I talk here, right? When I talk, I may make some good points and sound like, oh wow, that was a good point. But my demeanor, my tone, my thing, I keep it a little bit urban, you know what I'm saying? Like I keep it, even though I can speak with much different diction when I need to. Like when I go preach at my friends' churches, I change up a little bit because I know that this audience is a different audience. They're white or they're predominantly Asian, and they're not used to the Black mannerisms and the Black. So I change to serve the context that I'm speaking in.
To the Jew,
but when I'm talking to you, huh?
To the Jew, I'm a Jew. To the Gentile,
right, exactly, bro, exactly. So when I'm with you, I'm just chilling, like this home field advantage,
Oh, absolutely.
You're gonna get that edge, the street edge from me some.
Yeah.
But when I write, you can't give people street edge when you write as much. So I want people to understand, wow, there's actually real intellectual insights here and real proof that like this dude like does research. Like he's not just talking out the side of his neck. I really get out there. So when you read Substack articles, I mean, Strack said this and other people have told me this, but he said, when I read your articles, and I'm not saying that, I'm only saying this so you can understand what I mean. Not to come somehow boast or something, but he said, when I read your Substack articles, it's like I get to see a different you. I see the more intelligible, the more intellectual side of you when I read you. And that's exactly right. I write more scholarly, I write more intellectually because I want that. I don't get to display that side as much.
Right.
I'm comfortable being a big black dude and just being from where I'm from. But when I write, I don't want to sound like that when I write. I want to be taken seriously when I write. And so I write at a more scholarly level. So the writing of me is a combination of both. Curt Kennedy is more the intellectual side and Kurt Allen is more intellectual, well, Curt Kennedy is more like that's the Dr. Jekyll of me. Like, I'm a, man, you know, where the smoke at? You know what I'm saying? It's whatever. You know what I'm saying? Kurt Allen is more, you know, right brain, a little bit more thinking. I'm actually a little bit more even reserved. I'm more a little bit low key as Curt Allen, but as Curt Kennedy, it's like, man, with the smoke, it's whatever. Let's get to it. Like, so when I write, you get a little bit. When I write music, I'm Curt Kennedy. You're gonna get that. You know, you heard my music. You're gonna get that. When I write for Substack, you're gonna get Curt Allen. You're gonna get the intellectual, and that's what's different. So I'm giving people different sides of me.
Yeah, that's good, man. I'm glad that I'm able to see that side of it too, because I get to read your articles and it's different, yo. Because I started knowing who you were just through the podcast, and then I started getting to know who you were through the music, and then the writing, and somewhere in between there, I was just calling you up, hitting you up. You know, behind the scenes with this Wrath and Grace stuff is where I really got to get to know you. So I know that there's so many different levels to who you are. Like I said in episode 1. So this is just dope, just getting to hear from you on different, you know, different topics and hearing your perspective. We did 3 episodes, man.
Yeah, that's dope, bro. I appreciate it.
So yeah, hey, we're gonna conclude this again. We're gonna do the speed round right after this, but we're gonna conclude this episode, conclude this series. This is Saint Life Podcast, episode 3. Black is King, part 3, and I got my man Curt Kennedy with me, man. Thank you very much for joining me these first 3 episodes.
It's been a privilege, bro. It's been a privilege, man. Might, you know, see we jump back in here in the future. I know you gotta do what you gotta do with that Saint Life. I might have gave them too much smoke though. They might not want. They might, you know, sometimes it just be too much. I'm not Enneagram 8. Oh, it might be too much for them. So,
no, we definitely hope to have you back, man. Thank you.
Yeah,
again.
Definitely, bro. Appreciate it.
All right, y'all. I'll catch y'all the next time. You're gonna be doing. I haven't done an intro episode for this podcast yet, so I don't know what we're gonna do for that. But you guys will get to know more about me probably in the next episode. So, let me get out of here, man. God bless y'all.